Just want to reiterate the breaking news at this hour. Housing Secretary Michael Gove has announced he will not stand for re-election as MP for Surrey Heath. In a post on social media, he said after nearly 20 years serving the wonderful people of Surrey Heath and over a decade in Cabinet across 5 government departments, I've today taken the decision to step down as a member of Parliament. In a letter to the chairman of the Surrey Heath Conservatives, he said, "Thank you for your kindness earlier. As we discussed, I've decided today not to seek to represent Surrey Heath at the forthcoming general election. That 4 Prime Ministers asked me to serve the country in their governments has been the honour of my life." Let's bring in our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Sam, did you see this coming?
Well, I think it does tell you that the political winds are shifting. No, there wasn't indications, there weren't sources saying that Michael Gove was about to do this, but you have long wondered what the purpose of Michael Gove will be in a government at the moment led by Rishi Sunak. I think he has been a little unhappy for some time about the way the government has been going, the direction of the government. It's worth just saying a bit about why Michael Gove is important, which is why his feelings towards the government matter. Michael Gove is an iconic figure who has traversed all the 14 years that we've had Conservatives in Downing Street. He's not just been any other cabinet minister. He's almost always been at the top table. He was extremely close to David Cameron when he was Prime Minister, advising him for Prime Minister's questions as part of his kitchen cabinet. That relationship enduring all the way up to the Brexit referendum, when once again he played an absolutely pivotal role leading the Brexit referendum for the Vote Leave side. He was a key face alongside Boris Johnson that delivered Britain's departure from the European Union. He was then central, after a little hiatus in government, he did return under Theresa May, and then was central for many of the years of Boris Johnson's premiership until he was sacked by Boris Johnson in the final hours of Boris Johnson's premiership, and then served under Rishi Sunak, but I think of late has struggled to feel like he was making as big a difference in government as he has at some time. It will be a blow to the morale of the Conservative Party because for so many years, when the Conservative Party has perhaps been a little low, Michael Gove has had the wit, the ability and the intelligence to pick the party up again. He was regarded as a strong performer on our TV screens, one of the cleverest members of the cabinet, somebody who shaped policies and sold policies to the public. He will take with him the achievement of introducing free schools in his period as Education Secretary, which was brought, I think, in his view, to a slightly premature end by David Cameron just before the 2015 election. He then moved on to the Department for Justice, where he tried to modernise and do some reforms in a slightly briefer tenure there before he ended up running the Leave campaign. So it's that blend of communication. He was, of course, a former journalist. He was, frankly, if I'm being honest, my first boss at the Times 24 years ago. But departed journalism for a safe harbour in politics after taking the Surrey Heath seat in 2005. But right now, not only will there be kind of how he is feeling towards the government, there are electoral pressures for him. That Surrey Heath seat, I suspect, under some pressure from the Liberal Democrats, along with, I think, the Chancellor's seat as well, who is also going to face an uphill battle to be re-elected. But Michael Gove, who we haven't seen quite so much of on telly of late, I have to say, compared to earlier parts of his career, I do think that he also represents a certain strand of Conservative thinking. Now, Michael Gove was, sure, a very prominent Brexiteer, but lately he's been fighting inside Cabinet to make sure that the party doesn't sort of drift off into mimicking the political agenda of the party to the right of it, Reform UK, the party that Nigel Farage set up and Richard Tice runs. And I think he does represent something of a kind of bulwark of the Conservative moderates movement. as I say, yes, a Brexiteer, but a moderate Brexiteer, keen not to see a party that he has basically devoted his life to drift too far to the right of British politics. The question is, will people read into his departure that now drift is unstoppable? Perhaps if the party lose the next election, electing somebody considerably more right-wing than we have seen and allowing figures like Nigel Farage into the country, into the party. The question is, does he foresee a dangerous path that the Conservative Party might put itself on, depending on the outcome of the general election? But more than anything else, what you have in Michael Gove leaving the Conservative Parliamentary Party now at the next election is somebody who is regarded as a doer. A doer, whether they're in the television studios, whether they were in a cabinet role, whether they were acting out reforms, or during the COVID period where he was in the Cabinet Office, and absolutely pivotal to Britain's response to COVID alongside Boris Johnson. And by in every sense, an extraordinarily controversial figure when doing that. I mean, he's not been afraid of controversy all the way through his political career. This is a guy, Michael Gove, who picks fights. He picked fights with the teaching unions back in the early 2010s. He was prepared to pick fights in the Justice Department with officials and others, and in many cases, and on some occasions, getting quite some notoriety and causing quite some opprobrium for the party that he was working for. It was Michael Gove really who brought to prominence the phrase "the blob" to really refer to. I think initially it was the kind of education establishment, but it came to be used as a shorthand for Whitehall and the civil service and institutions really that are reluctant to reform, and really anybody that Michael Gove didn't like, and then it became a more widespread term of political abuse. But Michael Gove was the person that brought that framing into British politics. Just as he changed policy, he changed language, he showed how to communicate. He was responsible for some of the most high-profile moments of drama in our politics in the last 14 years. Who can forget the day that Michael Gove decided, having backed Boris Johnson for the 2016 leadership contest, to stab Boris Johnson in the back and declare that he was no longer going to back him, forcing Boris Johnson out of the contest. Then the two made up. He sat in Boris Johnson's government. He then demanded Boris Johnson leave. Boris Johnson sacked him. The turbulence has been incredible, but this will be a moment, I suspect, many Conservatives will think that somebody, a big figure of the last 14 years, of so many different Prime Ministers' cabinets, is now departing. What does that mean, and what does that tell you about where we are in Conservative politics right now on the eve of an election?
OK, fascinating stuff. Sam, thank you very much. The breaking news this hour then, Michael Gove to stand down at the general election, saying it was time for a new generation to lead, and highlighted his time in various government roles, including as Education Secretary, Cabinet Office Minister and Housing Secretary, as Sam was saying. We'll bring you plenty more reaction to that throughout the evening. Well, Labour as well has been on the campaign trail today. Sir Keir Starmer's been to Glasgow, where he launched his party's campaign north of the border, along with the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sawar. Sir Keir told Sky News that winning votes in Scotland wasn't just about winning the election, but also about positioning himself as a Prime Minister for the whole of the UK. Sky's political editor Beth Rigby reports.
Friends, please welcome my friend Keir Starmer.
Starmer's battleground tour starts in Scotland. His message singular, change. His target, the SNP.
This is an election about change. And Scotland's voice is vital, absolutely vital. It needs to be a leading voice. Send a message. Send a message. That is the height of the SNP ambition, to send a message. A protest in Westminster. I don't want Scotland to send a message. I want Scotland to send a government, a Labour government.
And the mood here buoyant, the energy palpable. In 4 elections on the bounce, Labour has been nearly wiped out in Scotland by the SNP. This pair now on the cusp of a very big comeback, with dozens of seats in play that Starmer says he has to convert.
Scotland is absolutely vital to Labour government, not just numerically, although that's important, but also because if I'm privileged enough to come in to serve as the Prime Minister, I want to be the Prime Minister for the whole of the United Kingdom, and therefore powerful voices from Scotland matter.
You say that you need Scotland to win a Labour government, but that is not true. Is this a version of Project Fear? You are frightening Scots into saying if you don't vote Labour, you're going to get the Tories, when they can still vote if they want for the SNP.
No, it's a recognition of the low base we started from in 2019. The project that we're building, which I want to be a project for all of Britain to take us forward, but also something which is really important to me personally.
Labour's Scottish leader Anna Sarwar's task then to take the SNP out.
If you want to get rid of the Tories, if you want to maximise Scotland's influence, if you want to deliver the change Scotland and the UK needs, you need to vote Scottish Labour.
From one battleground to another, stop to South Ribble, a classic marginal seat in the northwest, turned to Blair in '97, the Tories taking it back in 2010.
In a way, this is where the power goes away from myself and Rishi Sunak and to you, because you're the ones who are going to be going into the polling booth.
But in this election, away from the geography, other fault lines emerging. Swathes of traditional Labour voters in seats that aren't marginal, concerned about this leader's stance on the Israel-Hamas war. You've been up to Scotland, you're here in South Ribble, both battleground areas. You also have an issue with another battleground emerging for you in terms of the election, which is the matter of the Israel-Hamas war. You keep saying you have a plan to resolve these tensions. What's the plan?
We are very clear that, and have been now for weeks and weeks and weeks, there needs to be a ceasefire straight away. We have to stop the hostilities because, thousands upon thousands of people have been killed in Gaza. Desperately need humanitarian aid to come in and the beginning of a process to a two-state solution, including recognition of Palestine.
Now into the heavy lifting of this campaign, Starmer crisscrossing the country. But his majority doesn't just rest on marginals. He has to secure his base too. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Lancashire.
Stay with us here on Sky News. Coming up, plenty more reaction to the breaking news this evening that Michael Gove will stand down as an MP before the general election.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place for news.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent and I'm based here in Beijing.
We help you understand the world with us. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise.
Katie Spencer, Sky News in London.
Welcome back. Let's return to our breaking news then this evening that Michael Gove will stand down as a Member of Parliament at the general election. He said in a message on social media that it was time for a new generation to lead and highlighted his time in various government roles, including as Education Secretary, Cabinet Office Minister, Housing Secretary as well. In a letter to the chairman of the Surrey Heath Conservatives, he said, "I also know the toll office can take. As to those closest to me, no one in politics is a conscript," he said. "We're volunteers who willingly choose our fate, and the chance to serve is wonderful, but there comes a moment when you know that it is time to leave." Well, as you can see, I'm joined now by former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall. Good to see you, Claire. Well, this came as quite a bombshell. I'm not sure anyone was expecting it.
No, this really has set the tone for the day. This is now the third Conservative MP who has decided not to stand, and probably the biggest name we have had so far. This brings us the total of 77 Conservative MPs who aren't standing, but Michael Gove certainly is the one with the biggest legacy. Now, whether you love him or loathe him, he has been really a large player in Conservative politics for at least the last decade, where he's been in cabinet, and he's certainly been around for 20 years and been considered to be quite a brain within the Conservative Party. Now, as I say, he is incredibly divisive. Teachers, no doubt, will be celebrating the fact he really did take the fight to them. And having been with some teachers today, I know the level of anger still is there when you mention the name of Michael Gove. So I suggest that this is quite a turnaround for the Conservative Party only on day 2 of an election campaign.
Yeah, I mean, what will it do for morale?
It's not going to be a great look. I think people are now going to be digging deep. Those who have said that they are standing are going to be assessing their situation and their decision. I think it's very sad. I think we've lost a very experienced parliamentarian. I know that his Surrey seat was one of those that was deemed to be at risk. And I think he wants to avoid the infamous Portillo moment. But I do think it's a shame. The Conservative Party is richer when you have these voices within the party. And Michael Gove and his Renters Reform Bill, which sadly has now been lost, I think was going to be a real change for good. So I am actually quite sad to see him go.
Yeah, his seat was certainly under pressure, wasn't it? Probably from the Lib Dems mainly. He said at the cabinet meeting where Rishi Sunak announced that there was going to be a general election earlier this week, he said, "Who dares wins, and you have dared, Prime Minister." It didn't sound like someone on the brink of quitting. Do you think this was a recent decision, or do you think he's been mulling it over for some time?
The one thing that is certain with Michael Gove is that he can say these things. We all remember the time when he supported Boris Johnson in his bid for the leadership of the Conservative Party, only to turn around and knife him in the front. So he always does the unexpected. I think that he probably had this planned. He is an incredibly clever gentleman. I would suggest that he is looking after himself and his family, and he would have had this in the making. And to do it on a Friday evening to lead into the headlines for the weekend was certainly quite a Machiavellian move.
Yeah, I mean, he's managed to serve, hasn't he, under a number of prime ministers. We know he was very close, particularly to David Cameron. He has served under Rishi Sunak. But do you think he's been concerned about the direction of travel of the party, of the government, and indeed the Prime Minister?
I think he's always been quite open of his disappointment with the way Brexit has been handled. He was one of the main architects of Brexit, and I think he was quite disappointed with a lot of the decisions made. But he was always the voice that went out onto the media rounds to try and calm a situation down. And that's what you needed at the time. You needed that person to go out there and say, actually, it isn't as bad as you all think, even if it actually was. So, yes, I think he's probably disappointed, but he was also an incredible grown-up when it came to party politics, and he understood that you needed to work with all sides of the party, and that is going to be very, very sadly missed when we eventually come back after the election on the 4th of July.
What do you think he'll do next? He was a journalist, wasn't he, before he entered politics? He gave our very own Sam Coates his first job, I think, or certainly he was Sam's boss for a bit. And there has been a suggestion that maybe he'll go back into journalism, maybe even become an editor. What do you think?
Well, wouldn't that be the ultimate irony to come back and orchestrate a media campaign looking at whichever government comes in to lead? But I think he would probably be best placed to write a book about his time. I suspect we will see that. He's got his journalistic endeavours behind him, but I also wonder if he may well do something in the housing arena to look at what can be done best. And I think there'll probably be either developers or housing charities that will be looking to take on his knowledge. So I think really the world is his oyster. I don't think we need to worry about that. I think that Rishi Sunak, after launching Day 2 and being filmed in Belfast's Titanic Quarter, needs to really steady the ship before it does sink ahead of Day 3.
Well, that's the key issue, isn't it? That so many MPs are quitting, so many MPs are standing down. The fear is that voters will see this as rats leaving a sinking ship.
Yes, I mean, we saw today John Redwood, who is a well-known name, and also Greg Clark, sadly suggesting they are not going to stand. David Evernett, another long-standing MP here in Kent. I don't know if it's rats and sinking ship is the message we want to get out there. I think a lot of people have had a vast career in politics and now are just thinking they don't have the energy to fight the seat again and they want somebody to be able to give it their all. But it doesn't look good when you have drip after drip of Conservative MPs standing down on a pretty much daily basis.
Indeed. We will leave it there. Claire Pepsall, thank you very much indeed. Another of those MPs standing down is Matt Hancock, former Health Secretary. Of course, he reacted to this news that Michael Gove is also standing down in the Commons a short time ago.
My right honourable friend for Surrey Heath has announced that he will not be standing again. He served almost entirely within the cabinet in the last 14 years, and I'm sure he would have been in this debate had he almost entirely. He would, I'm sure, have been at this debate had he had the opportunity to, and I'm sure that
Matt Hancock there reacting to the news that Michael Gove is quitting as an MP. He says, throughout my time in politics, although I have undoubtedly made mistakes, I've always tried to be a voice for those who've been overlooked and undervalued. I have tried to fight for greater social justice. My education reforms were designed to build a country where everyone, no matter their background, can become the authors of their own life stories. His life story has taken another direction. Plenty more reaction next. Welcome back. You're with Sky News, and breaking news this evening. Michael Gove is standing down as a MP. The Housing Secretary joining a growing parliamentary exodus as he praises Rishi Sunak in a letter for representing the very best virtues of the Tory party, but said it is time to leave in his letter to the chairman of Surrey Heath Conservatives. Mr Gove, who's been MP for that constituency since 2005, said, "I know the toll office can take. As to those closest to me, no one in politics is a conscript." Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is in central lobby for us getting reaction. John.
Well, the vast majority of MPs are absolutely stunned by this news. They've just been having the valedictory debate in the Commons. It's just finished. There's the toing and froing between the Lords and the Commons as we await for prorogation. Marcus Jones, the Deputy Chief Whip for the Conservatives, was winding up the debate on behalf of Penny Mordaunt. And what happened was that Matt Hancock, of all people, former cabinet colleague of Mr Gove, raised a point of order, I think I'm right in saying, and talked about it and praised Mr Gove's record. Now, most MPs had no idea till they saw it on their phones. I've just been chasing a few MPs in there. Most of them didn't know. Knowing smile from Simon Hart, the Chief Whip. He obviously knew, and I think Mr Jones knew as well. Anyway, let's talk to an MP who was in the chamber, saw what happened. Andy Carter, the MP for Warrington South. Tell us what happened when Matt Hancock raised the resignation of Mr Gove.
Yes, it was part of the summing up speech that Marcus Jones, the Deputy Chief Whip, was giving after the valedictory speeches that have gone on all afternoon for MPs that are retiring. And Matt Hancock intervened and broke the news to members of the chamber. And I have to say, I was surprised. I'm very saddened as well. I think Michael Gove has been one of the most consequential politicians of this era. I think if you look particularly at his record in education, at the time, it's no secret he wasn't liked by the unions. But if you look at where we are today with our schools, in my constituency in Warrington South, every school is now good or outstanding. In 2010, when Michael became the Education Secretary, it was about 60%. Standards have improved in English schools. Children have driven up the league table in terms of English and maths, and I think the work that he did at the time has paid off over the long term. So I'm very, very sad to see him go.
I think I'm right in saying in that period he was the man who brought Dominic Cummings into Whitehall, wasn't he? Mr Cummings worked for him, and such an abrasive character. I remember David Cameron saying he fired Mr Cummings, and that was when Michael Gove was moved out of education. He's been a controversial figure, hasn't he? Boris Johnson's supporters accused him of knifing him in the back. Theresa May accused him of disloyalty. A controversial figure, wouldn't you agree?
Look, I think he's been an effective politician. Perhaps some of the most effective politicians are going to ruffle some feathers along the way. I think he's done a tremendous job of standing up for Conservative values and delivering on the things that the British public actually wanted to deliver. Better schools, work on levelling up around the UK, and I suspect over the next 10 years, the work that he's done as the Levelling Up Secretary will really start to pay off, and people will realise what a politician he actually has been.
Well, I was going to ask you about levelling up. You're MP for Warrington South. Has levelling up been good for Warrington, or are you a bit disappointed it hasn't lived up to all its promises?
I've totted up the money that Warrington has had in the last 4.5 years, and it's about £400 million pumped into Warrington. Now, that will take time to feed through, but it's money that's gone into skills improvement, into public transport, into improving the roads to make sure that people can get around. It will make a difference, and I think the work that Michael has done and this government has done actually is going to demonstrate over the next 10 years the transformational effect of a Conservative government.
I've counted, there's something like, if you include Theresa May, it's something like 16 or 17 people who have served in the Conservative cabinet who are quitting. You go back to people like John Redwood of years ago, you've got Chris Grayling, Brandon Lewis, all sorts of people, Nadeem Zahawi, Dominic Raab, the list goes on. Are you worried about a brain drain of top talent? Ben Wallace is an obvious example. All these experienced Conservative politicians quitting. How worried are you about that? And is it because they all fear defeat at the general election?
Not at all. We've got a great Prime Minister in Rishi Sunak. We've got a fantastic Chancellor in terms of Jeremy Hunt. And we've got 360-odd MPs that have served in this government. Many of them have been here for 20 or 30 years. As time moves on, they're going to want to retire. There's good people coming in. There were 90 extremely talented members of Parliament elected in 2019. Many of them are moving into cabinet roles now. Look at Laura Trott, Claire Coutinho, doing fantastic jobs, ensuring that the British people see what a Conservative government can do and delivering for people as we move into this general election phase.
Now, you're standing down. You made a valedictory speech. I think you're standing down because your seat disappears. Is that right?
Yeah,
Are you on the lookout for another one?
Well,
plenty of vacancies now, aren't there?
I never say never. Yeah, my boundaries change, so it means it becomes a Labour seat. It's impossible for me to win, and the number one rule in politics is to do the maths. So absolutely, if the right seat is available, I'll look at that. But you know, I'm standing down from Warrington South today.
Thank you for talking to us about Mr Gove. Clearly, what came as a shock to the MPs in the chamber. So what's happening here at the moment is that the sitting in the Commons is suspended. In fact, both houses. There's a little bit of toing and froing as we await, I think, the final formalities of this Parliament. But we are in the last few minutes, really. And clearly, the reaction of most MPs to this news is one of shock. I shall hunt around for some more MPs to bring you more reaction. Jonathan.
OK, John, yeah, we'll leave you to grab whoever you can in Central Lobby. Thank you very much. Don't go away. Plenty more reaction here on Sky News to the breaking news this hour that Michael Gove is stepping down as an MP.
It's really interesting because what they've been able to do is sort of stabilise living breast tissue in the lab for about a week. And what that means is that we can see directly the impact of new drugs and new therapies, how they would respond in the human body, as opposed to just in cells or in our closest animal relatives or anything like that. So this has the potential to really individualise and change treatment for women and men if they get breast cancer as it progresses. But this is very, very early stage. So more and more people are getting breast cancer. The mortality is dropping, so more and more people are living for longer with it or are surviving it. So what we need to do now, after this piece of research, is actually work out how we use the drugs on this tissue and see what happens next. Because when you look at human tissue as a whole, there are whole loads of things that go into it. The blood supply, the immune response, even just sort of the matrix that it lives in. And that's how we will begin to be able to tell the difference between why do some drugs work in some people and not in others? And when we can individualise care, that's when we will get the better responses. When you see these stories in the newspaper, you think, oh, how is this going to help me tomorrow? How is it going to help my loved one tomorrow? And unfortunately, we are quite a long way from that. But anything that gives us hope when we know that cancer incidence is rising is hugely important. We know that some cases of breast cancer will be related actually to alcohol. There's no safe amount of alcohol that you can have to reduce your risk of breast cancer. The more you drink, the increase your risk is. But what this research was showing, that over 10,000 people died of alcohol-specific related deaths in 2022. And that was the highest amount that has ever been recorded. And by that, I mean specifically liver related to alcohol, or perhaps another thing that was specifically related to that alcohol, as opposed to alcohol increasing your risk of cancer or alcohol increasing your risk of heart disease. And this is really important because we need to look at how do we prevent this alcohol-induced harm. In Wales and in Scotland, they have a minimum pricing per unit of alcohol, which may make a difference. But actually, what is the funding and treatment availabilities for people with drug and alcohol-related harm?
Welcome back. You're with Sky News. Let's get more reaction now to Michael Gove's decision not to seek re-election in July. I'm joined now by James Starkey, a former special advisor to Michael Gove. Good to get your thoughts on all of this. Did you see this coming?
No, I didn't. I spoke to him a few months ago, and I think at the time he had intended to stand, but obviously he's decided that now's the time to stand down.
Why?
I don't know, but I do think, listening to some of the reaction that you've had on here, I think when people reflect, they'll see that Michael is perhaps one of the most consequential politicians we've had, certainly in the last 2 decades. You can only really count prime ministers and maybe a couple of chancellors that have had the impact on public life that Michael has, from education through to the environment, his time at Justice. I think as we reflect, on his decision to leave Parliament, people will see that he's been respected by many of the people you've had on, because he's delivered over a very long period of time.
Controversial figure, though, isn't he? He knifed Boris Johnson in the back. Theresa May said he was disloyal. Controversial in many ways. And you talk about his education reforms. Well, there'll be plenty of teachers who won't be disappointed to see him go.
I mean, I think on education, it's a case in point. It was very controversial at the time. It's now Labour policy, the things that Michael brought in during his time as Education Secretary. So while it was challenging to get big reforms through, which it always is, you look back and now see that it's completely accepted as something that's delivered huge benefits for children of this country, as you've seen us rise up the kind of literacy and maths league tables. And indeed, Theresa, who didn't include him in her first cabinet, then needed to bring him back to shore up. And obviously he went in and eventually helped ensure the country was ready for Brexit.
Yeah, of course, a big Brexiteer. But do you think he's been unhappy with how things have been handled since the referendum?
I don't think unhappy. I mean, I think it's been a difficult time for the country and the government, as we've seen. But I think Michael's always played his role in doing his best to deliver on that, whether it was his time at DEFRA, in the Cabinet Office, and then over the past couple of years at Levelling Up. So I don't think it's about unhappiness. As people have said, there's a group of MPs, Michael is one of them, he's done 2 decades in Parliament. That's a long time in a job. And I think when he reflects back and when other people do, they'll see some of the achievements that, frankly, many politicians would kill for just 10, 20% of what he's managed to do in politics.
What's this going to do for the election campaign from Rishi Sunak's point of view? He's going to be disappointed by this, isn't he?
Look, I don't think it's undoubtedly it's a blow. And we've obviously seen a few MPs stand down in the past few days. I've always thought it's a kind of natural process of you had a lot of MPs who came in either 2005 or 2010 who probably feel that at the age they are, often mid-50s, they can go on and do other things. And that's just a kind of timing thing. I think for the PM, you just got to get on and focus on the campaign.
But for morale purposes, it's a pretty bad look, isn't it? You've seen John Redwood go. You've now seen Michael Gove go. These are big beasts, big brains, and they're moving on.
Yeah, look, it's difficult, but I've worked on a few campaigns. I worked on the referendum, which we were told we had absolutely no chance of winning, and we all know how that turned out. And I worked on the 2017 campaign, which we went into, like Labour, 20 points ahead, everyone assuming we'd get a majority of 60, and we know how that one worked out. So campaigns are funny things. I think, on a campaign whether things are going well or badly, you've got to stay in the middle and keep fighting. And that's what both campaigns, if they're going to be successful, will have to do with the major parties.
Yeah, interesting you talk about staying in the middle. Do you think part of the reason he's gone is because the Conservative Party hasn't been staying in the middle? It's been moving in a direction that he's unhappy with?
I don't know about that. I mean, I think always the interesting thing with Michael is if you saw the right of the party often didn't feel at ease with him because some of his other policies, whereas perhaps on the left of the party, because of his strong support for Brexit, they didn't feel so at ease. So Michael's interesting in that you could never really bracket him in a particular part of the party. So I'm not sure the shape of the party now is kind of influential in that way, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, just remind us of probably the most interesting or dramatic, I think is the word, isn't it, really, moment in his recent career when he stabbed Boris Johnson in the back. I mean, that was a remarkable moment in political history.
Yeah, having been quite close to it, coming off vote leave, it was a surprise, and it was a difficult time, bumpy few days, I think, afterwards. But as I said, I think, they worked amazingly well together on the Vote Leave campaign. And, thankfully as well, they came together back as a force with obviously Boris leading it in 19 to a big victory. So, there's been ups and downs quite obviously in that relationship.
What do you think he'll do next?
I don't know. I'm excited to see. I know, having spoken to him over the past few months, I think he'll retain a really keen interest in some of those policy areas that he's been involved in. Education, I think we'll see him do something in education and the environment and justice. I think he always felt he had unfinished business at his time as Justice Secretary. I think he's very passionate about those areas. So I think from speaking to him in the past few months, he'll still want to have a kind of keen eye on those. And we know his background as a journalist, so we might well see him pop as a columnist to give his views on what's going on in politics over the coming months.
And if you were writing his political biography, what would you say his legacy has been?
I think he'll probably always be best remembered in terms of policy with education and obviously Brexit. And people will have their views on those. But they are undoubtedly seismic events. And also I've spoken to people in the Labour Party, and I think one of the things that specifically people will relate to Michael, nearly called it MG, sorry, with Michael, is delivery. And so you can look across those things, big areas that Michael's been involved in, and you can have an opinion on whether you think they were good or bad or the right thing to do. But the one thing that, when you speak to people in Westminster of all political hues, that people don't doubt is Michael was someone who was able to get the white horse machine to work for him. And that's incredibly unique in politics, as I imagine whoever goes into government after the next election will say, and anyone who's been involved will say. And Michael was a doer and a deliverer, and that is fairly unique in politics, and that's why so many people respect him, whether or not they sometimes agree with what he does.
Fascinating stuff. James Starkey, former special advisor to Michael Gove. We appreciate your time and giving us your analysis and reaction to the breaking news that Cabinet Minister Michael Gove is the latest high-profile Tory MP to announce that he is standing down ahead of the July the 4th election, the Housing Secretary joining a growing parliamentary exodus. More details, top of the hour.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first.
You're watching Sky News. It's 8 o'clock. Our top stories tonight. The Housing Secretary Michael Gove announces he won't be seeking re-election after almost 20 years as an MP. It comes as the party leaders take their election messages to the country on day 2 of the campaign trail. Also ahead, Paula Venables is accused of being in La La Land as the former post office boss tearfully concludes her evidence to the inquiry.
I loved the post office. I gave it...
And the International Court of Justice orders Israel to halt its offensive in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Good evening. We start with the breaking news that the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, has announced he's standing down as an MP after almost 20 years in Parliament. In a letter announcing his decision, Mr Gove said it was time for a new generation to lead. It means 77 Conservative MPs will not contest their seats in July. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, reports.
A goodbye wave from the Prime Minister. Then, out for a ride. Rishi Sunak testing the merchandise on a visit to a dockyard in Belfast's Titanic Quarter. Resolute against the charge he's the captain of a sinking ship.
Hi, I'm Rishi.
The fourth nation in 2 days for him, a whirlwind series of tightly controlled events with invited guests and workers. This business received millions in government grants since Rishi Sunak came in, the perfect place for a photo op. However long it takes. A campaign visit to a nation where his party barely stands any candidates.
Enjoying it?
The Prime Minister wanting credit for his most notable diplomatic success in office.
Rishi Sunak here in Northern Ireland. A nod to perhaps his greatest achievement as Prime Minister, sorting out this nation's position after Brexit. Meanwhile, back in Westminster, all sorts of parts of his legacy going up in smoke.
The surprise election forcing big legislation to be shelved, including his flagship plan to phase out smoking.
The smoking ban, of course, disappointed to not be able to get that through at the end of this session, given the time available. But what I'd say is that's evidence of the bold action that I'm prepared to take. That's the type of Prime Minister I am. That's the type of leadership that I bring.
That not the only pledge left on the shelf. The mother of Manchester bombing victim Martin Hett met the PM earlier this week, campaigning for legislation in her son's name.
He promised me that he will introduce the legislation before summer recess. And unfortunately, for 4 or 5 hours later, he then announced that there's going to be a general election. So I feel a bit misled.
There's been a mass exodus of Tory MPs from this place even before the election. 5 more today, including levelling up Secretary Michael Gove announcing they won't stand, taking the total to 77 Tories, higher than before the 97 Labour landslide. Big beasts saying their farewells today, each with their own legacy.
You may have a month. Let's face it, the last few years in this government could be weeks.
I've tried my hardest.
I will always carry a piece of this place in my heart.
I think it is the best job in the world.
Something Tory MPs can boast about. A drop in the energy price cap today to the lowest levels in 2 years. Rishi Sunak says it means his plan is working. But are the voters in marginal Milton Keynes feeling it?
Prices are still high and wages are still as they are. So, in a way, it doesn't mean anything.
The Rishi Sunak economy, yeah? No, it hasn't delivered, I'm sorry.
He didn't deliver on his promise, he failed.
The Prime Minister admitted to journalists on his plane there are difficult days. But he surprised everyone with this election. Now there's no way out. Sam Coates, Sky News, Birmingham.
Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is in the central lobby of the Houses of Parliament for us. And John, what's the reaction you've been getting there so far?
MPs are stunned. The news was broken by, of all people, Matt Hancock, as that valedictory debate was coming to an end. He intervened on a speech by the Deputy Chief Whip, Marcus Jones, paid a tribute to his former cabinet colleague. This is the letter from Mr Gove, quite a long letter. It's to his local party chairman in Surrey Heath. I suppose we would call it the Surrey stockbroker belt, where he had a majority of, I think, from memory, about 16,000 the last election. MP for Surrey Heath since 2005, after a career in journalism, which included a spell on the Times. It's possible he may well be heading back to journalism now. Very briefly, just summarising some of the things he said in here. He talks about the toll that office can take on those closest to him. No one in politics is a conscript. We're volunteers. He then goes through his ministerial record in various government posts: education, chief whip, justice, environment, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and now more recently housing and levelling up. He's the latest in a string of cabinet ministers to quit. I think from memories 3 or 4 in the latest in the resignations. 18,000, I'm being reliably informed, is his majority, not 16,000. A bit safer than we thought. But it's the latest in a big brain drain from the cabinet. Really, altogether, there's something like 17 or 18 current or ex-cabinet ministers quitting at this general election. Now, to assess Mr Gove's career, I'm joined by Steve Tuckwell, who you may remember won the Uxbridge and South Ruislip by-election after Boris Johnson quit. Labour thought they were going to win that one, but Mr Tuckwell triumphed. What's your verdict on Mr Gove as a cabinet minister?
Well, it was certainly a surprise to hear the news in the chamber this afternoon. But as you've just read out, you know, the great career that Michael's had across his time as secretaries of state and cabinet ministers and chief whips, you know, Michael has performed solidly in all of those roles, and he's the great reformer for government policy, and he's really driven home, some great achievements. If you look at education in particular, we can now see so many more schools are Ofsted rated good or outstanding, and that's because of his reform. So he's been a great, solid performer for this government.
He talks in his letter about how he was proud to have led the Vote Leave campaign along with Boris Johnson and others. He's also famously, or notoriously, infamously, the man who brought Dominic Cummings into Whitehall. Now, he's not everyone's cup of tea, is he? David Cameron memorably said he had to fire Mr Cummings. He didn't actually fire Mr Gove from education because he upset a lot of people. He moved him to Chief Whip. That was another of his jobs. What do you think about what do you think about Mr Gove's role, first of all, in Vote Leave, then when his critics would say he knifed Boris Johnson in the back over the Tory leadership back in, 2016, after Brexit? What do you think of some of the more controversial aspects of Mr Gove's career?
Well, as you say, he's been front and centre in government for a very, very long time, and he has been that great reformer. Some of his reforms have been controversial, but he's been driving hard, and he's made some great achievements, as I said, particularly around education. So, he's had a very long and distinguished career, and I wish him all the best for whatever he chooses to do in the future.
What about housing and levelling up? I mean, we've just seen in the last 24 hours that the leasehold reforms and the renters' protection and so on, that's now not going to happen. I imagine in your constituencies, a lot of people rely on rented accommodation and so on. Is that a failure by Mr Gove? Do you think he's not got that legislation through?
Well, sadly, parliamentary time ran out given the announcement of the general election. But then if you also look at Mr Gove's record in levelling up across, particularly the north, the amount of communities across the north of the country, have significantly benefited from his time in office as Secretary of State for levelling up.
And what about this idea about a brain drain of senior politicians? I mean, it's the record today, we've learned, more Tories quitting than 1997. Not quite as many, I think I'm right in saying, the total number of MPs as 2010. That's Labour and Conservative, of course. But more Tory MPs quitting now than in 1997. What does that say about the mood amongst Tories? Does it suggest that many of your colleagues think you're heading for defeat?
Absolutely not, and you can actually see from the total numbers there's a lot of Labour MPs are stepping down as well.
There's not that many Labour MPs. It's 70 odd Conservatives and it's only 20 or 30 Labour.
Well, the important thing we do now, as those that are staying and we're sitting, and the new candidates that are coming on board, is we get out on those doorsteps and we drive home the Prime Minister's plan, which is a bold plan, and it is a plan. If we look at Labour, they don't have no plan. Keir Starmer, there's the bells going. Keir Starmer won't go head-to-head with the Prime Minister on television. So
yes, he will. He's going to do two. Mr. Sunak wanted one a week, 6. Don't forget we got the Euro every night.
Yeah, and I'll be certainly watching that football. But we need to be getting out on those doorsteps now, and we need to be driving home that message that there is a clear, bold plan for the future of this country.
Right, well, I think the ceremony is about to begin, isn't it? So thank you. You probably want to go and...
Thank you, and it's good to see you again.
All right. There we have Steve Tuckwell, the man who I was there when he won his by-election. What was it, July?
20th of July.
Yeah, it was July, yes. So Mr. Tuckwell praising Mr. Gove as a reformer in his various cabinet posts. So he didn't get on to what he thought about Dominic Cummings, but perhaps he'll tell me in private. Anyway, back to you. Is it Gillian? Gillian.
It is Gillian.
Can't see you.
Well remembered, John. Thank you. Well, I'm joined now by Michael Gove's former special advisor, Charlie Rowley, who was listening to that conversation that John was having there. Did you know that this was coming?
Well, good evening, Gillian. And no, I didn't, and I don't think many people did. But it's clearly a decision that Michael has taken, and after a bit of thought, after 19 years, almost 20 years, as he sets out in his letter, of being the MP for Surrey Heath, having served in cabinets, successive cabinets, under successive Conservative Prime Ministers, outlasting some of his contemporaries. He's been in the cabinet longer than David Cameron, Boris Johnson, Theresa May, and Liz Truss. So I think after a lot of thought, when the election was called, he's decided after 20 years of being an MP for Surrey Heath, but also serving in all of those roles at a very senior cabinet level, it's time to hang up his political boots.
But why now? I mean, this particular timing is extremely damaging for Rishi Sunak, isn't it?
Well, only he will know. But as he says in his letter, look, politics and being in frontline politics takes a toll on the individual and family and friends. And as I say, I think having served in successive Conservative cabinets in very, very senior roles, driving through all of those reforms that you were just hearing about with John and Steve there, so particularly in education, that was his first cabinet role, delivering on those reforms that now see kids in, particularly in England and Wales, shoot up those league tables and better at reading and writing and maths. He embattled in that department, obviously with unions and teachers and parents to get those reforms through. But now that they have had over a decade to come through, you're seeing those results. He served as Environment Secretary, as Justice Secretary, as Chief Whip. He was Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster in the Cabinet Office, dealing with that Brexit negotiations when the UK voted to leave the EU. He was then obviously tasked with coordinating the response to COVID-19 before being moved to Levelling Up Secretary to deal with housing and deliver more devolution across the country, giving mayors more powers, local communities more powers. There's a lot in there in the space of 19 years that I think you're not going to go away from that, not having been in very difficult conversations at times and enduring the tougher side of politics. So I think after 19 years, he's decided that after all of those departments and achieving as much as he has, that it's time to step down.
What would you say are his major standout achievements? What will he be remembered for politically?
I think everybody will remember him for his longevity and his ability to be a reformer in all of those departments that we've just talked about. And as I say, I think he learnt the lessons from being in the Department for Education, where if you do move too far and too fast in certain areas, it can have a negative impact, even though those reforms, as I say, are achieving exactly what they wanted to. And I think that was his lesson in every other department that he then went on to serve. You bring people with you, you get the results, you ask the right questions, and you get the answers. And I'm afraid there might have been one too many other of his colleagues that didn't follow in those footsteps that have had shorter careers than him. But he has had such a long time in frontline politics and within the Conservative Party that I think he will go down as one of Britain's best reformers, one of Britain's best Conservative reformers, and one of Britain's leading Conservatives.
OK, Charlie Rowley, thank you very much for speaking to us, Michael Gove's former special advisor there. Well, let's speak now to Joe Tanner, who is a former advisor to Boris Johnson. Thank you for joining us. Your reaction to the news?
It's just another surprise, really. I think it's we've been expecting more names to come, but I think this one was probably one that we hadn't necessarily priced in. But I think those that were closest to the Prime Minister were probably the ones more willing to hold out and announce much later. We know that many have been wanting to declare and had sort of agreed that they wouldn't say anything. But I think it was a surprise for it to be so late today that decision has been announced. I do wonder if there have been conversations going on behind the scenes to try and stop him and see if he'd reconsider.
How damaging do you think it is to the election campaign, this news coming today, day 2 of the election campaign trail?
I don't think it's particularly helpful, but I think the Conservatives are sort of doing their own job of self-sabotage at the moment, given the way that the thing started. And we've already had, on day 2, we've had a photograph of Rishi Sunak with an exit sign, and we've also seen him attending the Titanic quarter, which, you know, writes the headlines for itself. So I don't think it necessarily is helpful, but I'm not sure that it is going to sort of be a particularly big wound, given it already feels that the Tories are fighting an uphill battle anyway.
You're a former advisor to Boris Johnson, and Michael Gove, a controversial parliamentarian for many reasons, but most known perhaps for stabbing Boris Johnson in the back.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't part of that leadership work. I was involved with getting Boris to City Hall, but I can remember watching that moment and, you know, speaking to many people about that particular period. Boris and Michael had worked very closely together. You'll remember they worked very closely on that campaign to get Brexit done, to get the vote to get out, and then obviously Boris went on to fight to get Brexit done. I think the thing is, I think the Brexit vote will be something that Michael will be remembered for, but I think there are many other things that Charlie quite succinctly put together, in particular his education reforms, which many people actually across the political divide, while he's got many enemies across the political divides, he's also got many that do believe a lot of what he did and a lot of what he said did actually bring in real reform. I actually think one of the saddest things is that the levelling up agenda that was a big mantra of Boris's and was something that Michael Gove was brought in to do, I'm not sure it really ever delivered what was promised. And I think it's almost a shame that so much of that he was going to be spearheading, it didn't really feel that ever materialised.
Do you think he lost a lot of support and trust following on from his relationship, how it played out with Boris Johnson? Do you think he suffered reputational damage because of that?
I'm not sure. I mean, Michael is an incredibly polite, incredibly sort of gracious fellow. If you ever met him, he would be so kind, very warm, would always remember sort of small details. He was very good with people. And I think actually on a personal level with many, many of his colleagues, he did make an effort. I remember people telling me when he was, I think it was DEFRA secretary, that he used to spend sort of a lot of time just having these small meetings with MPs who wanted to discuss their problems, their challenges. So actually the decision in terms of what happened with Boris, you know, politics is a long game. People kind of move on, they move to they make new allegiances, they form new alliances, they make friends, they lose friends, they make more friends again, they decide to be back in bed with somebody they couldn't stand, a month before. It's a very interesting, it doesn't really play out in the way normal life does, and particularly relationships, friendships, your workplace colleagues, but you're also sort of in the trenches together as well. So I'm not sure really that it made that much of a difference. I think there are other people that have got very strong feelings about what happened, particularly when Boris ended up leaving as Prime Minister. Lots of people had, funnily enough, Rishi Sunak is one of the people that many colleagues were very upset with about his resignation and that sort of almost domino effect that it felt it started to create with lots of ministers then resigning. So I think there are other people that probably have more questions about their relationship with Boris or what happened with Boris potentially than Michael. But I think Michael, I'm sure, will resurface in another guise fairly soon, but certainly not the news we were expecting for a Friday night. And I'm sure it's going to write tomorrow's headlines. Maybe he'll have done Rishi a favour and got the Titanic headlines off the front pages. We'll see.
We shall see. Jo Turner, former advisor to Boris Johnson. Thank you. Well, let's return to the campaign trail, and Sir Keir Starmer's been to Glasgow, where he launched his party's campaign north of the border, along with the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar. Sir Keir told Sky News that winning votes in Scotland wasn't just about winning the election, but also about positioning himself as a Prime Minister for the whole of the UK. Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby, has this report.
Friends, please welcome my friend, Keir Starmer.
Starmer's battleground tour starts in Scotland. His message singular, change. His target, the SNP.
This is an election about change. And Scotland's voice is vital, absolutely vital. It needs to be a leading voice. Send a message. Send a message. That is the height of the SNP ambition, to send a message, a protest in Westminster. I don't want Scotland to send a message. I want Scotland to send a government, a Labour government.
And the mood here buoyant, the energy palpable. In 4 elections on the bounce, Labour has been nearly wiped out in Scotland by the SNP. This pair now on the cusp of a very big comeback, with dozens of seats in play that Starmer says he has to convert.
Scotland is absolutely vital to Labour government, not just numerically, although that's important, but also because if I'm privileged enough to come in to serve as the Prime Minister, I want to be the Prime Minister for the whole of the United Kingdom, and therefore powerful voices from Scotland matter.
You say that you need Scotland to win a Labour government, but that is not true. Is this a version of Project Fear? You are frightening Scots into saying if you don't vote Labour, you're going to get the Tories, when they can still vote if they want for the SNP.
No, it's a recognition of the low base we started from in 2019, the project that we're building, which I want to be a project for all of Britain to take us forward, but also something which is really important to me personally.
Labour's Scottish leader Anna Sarwar's task then to take the SNP out.
If you want to get rid of the Tories, if you want to maximise Scotland's influence, if you want to deliver the change Scotland and the UK needs, you need to vote Scottish Labour.
From one battleground to another, stop to South Ribble, a classic marginal seat in the northwest, turned to Blair in '97, the Tories taking it back in 2010.
In a way, this is where the power goes away from myself and Rishi Sunak and to you, because you're the ones who are going to be going into the polling booth.
But in this election, away from the geography, other fault lines emerging. Swathes of traditional Labour voters in seats that aren't marginal, concerned about this leader's stance on the Israel-Hamas war. You also have an issue with another battleground emerging for you in terms of the election, which is the matter of the Israel-Hamas war. You keep saying you have a plan to resolve these tensions. What's the plan?
We are very clear that, and have been now for weeks and weeks and weeks, there needs to be a ceasefire straight away. We have to stop the hostilities because, thousands upon thousands of people have been killed in Gaza. Desperately need humanitarian aid to come in and the beginning of a process to a two-state solution, including recognition of Palestine.
Now into the heavy lifting of this campaign, Starmer crisscrossing the country. But his majority doesn't just rest on marginals. He has to secure his base too. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Lancashire.
For crossing, it suits Israel.
Sorry, James, just breaking into you there just to bring the breaking news. We're just hearing that Andrea Leadsom, MP, is to stand down at the general election. That's the very latest that we have on that, following in from the announcement from Michael Gove that he too would not stand after the general election. Andrea Leadsom, a leading Brexiteer, she was part of a number of former cabinet ministers who publicly criticised Boris Johnson. That was after the publication of the Sue Gray report, that revealing the raucous rule-breaking, partying throughout the pandemic. Former cabinet minister, she blamed Boris Johnson for unacceptable failings of leadership over the Partygate scandal. She's a former business secretary, As we say, one of the many Conservative MPs that questioned Mr Johnson's position as Prime Minister after he was fined by the Met Police for breaking lockdown rules in Downing Street. And she sent a letter to her South Northamptonshire constituents in which she said that after careful study of the Sunak report, it was painfully clear that given the extent and severity of rule breaking taking place over a 20-month period, it is extremely unlikely that senior leaders were unaware of what was going on. So that breaking news that Andrea Leadsom is to stand down at the general election. On screen, I think that is her resignation letter, which has been sent in, and officially standing down as an MP at the next general election, as we know now, on July the 4th. OK, we shall bring you any further details as soon as they come in to us. But that resignation letter from Andrea Leadsom on screen, deciding not to stand at after the general election. She will stand down. This following from the news that Michael Gove also will not be standing. Welcome back. Just a reminder of the breaking news, and that is that Andrea Leadsom MP has decided to step down at this general election. Let's get reaction and speak to our Deputy Political Editor now, Sam Coates. Another surprise for your Friday afternoon, Sam.
That's right. A busy day in Conservative politics began with Rishi Sunak in Northern Ireland first thing this morning. Now another departure announced. Michael Gove an hour ago, now Andrea Leadsom. Now she also is a significant figure in Conservative politics. Long-time minister, she came in 2010. She served as a cabinet minister in the energy department, business secretary, a high-profile Brexiteer. She was one of the big figures on Vote Leave. And after that, she actually went for the Tory leadership, having to pull out because of disobliging comments that she made about Theresa May and motherhood that generated a lot of criticism. And then she bowed out, handing the keys to number 10, not to herself, but to Theresa May back in 2016 after the Brexit referendum. Now, she's released a letter largely paying tribute to herself. But there is one notable paragraph. It's the final paragraph in which she says that she will continue to support the Conservative Party through this general election and in the future and into the future as the party best aligned with the ideals and values of the people of the United Kingdom. But what's really interesting about this letter, Gin, is it doesn't say, even though it's to Rishi Sunak, it doesn't actually say anything nice about Rishi Sunak or particularly wish him well. There was some suggestion from my colleague Beth Rigby that Andrea Leadsom was asking about whether or not to put in letters to the 1922 committee last night to try and stop this election by forcing a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. So it feels like a big possibility that there's some bad blood that's led to her decision today. Anyway, another one bites the dust. We've had quite a lot. It's around the 80 mark of Conservatives that are standing down at this election. We've overtaken the number who are standing down that John Major saw in 1997 before Tony Blair's landslide. Andrea Leadsom now out, joining Michael Gove, also departing, joining a number of others, including Craig McKinley, who had both his hands and feet amputated, wanted to stay on, but the snap elections meant that he too has announced that he's standing down, the South Thanet MP. There could be more in the coming days. Doesn't make life any easier for Rishi Sunak.
And Sam, this timing has done great damage, hasn't it?
So you do always get MPs standing down at the end of a parliament at the moment an election is called. In some ways, it is a juncture where you see things like this happening. It happened to Labour before the 2019 general election. You had figures like Tom Watson suddenly announcing that they were going at the last minute, I think, from memory, on a Friday night, and so. There is an inevitability about the timing of this. The problem, I think the greater problem, is the scale of Tory MPs that are standing down, the volume that are going. They're sniffing the political wind, it seems like, and going, well, I might not win, and I'm not sure that I want to be part of this team any longer. 14 years is a good innings for having a Conservative in Downing Street. Now is a natural moment of political change. All those kind of inferences and impressions are very damaging for Rishi Sunak, who is fighting against the tide to hang on. And this is just another problem, the sort of sense of power slipping away and people leaving the team that he's got to deal with.
OK, Sam, for the moment, thank you. Or Andrea Leadsom and Michael Gove are the latest high-profile Conservative MPs to announce that they won't be seeking re-election. I'm joined now by Francis Elliott, editor of the House magazine, and a David Cameron biographer. Good evening to you. Your reaction to this latest news?
The double header of both Andrea and Michael. I mean, of the two, Michael is the bigger, I would say, blow. He's certainly the Tories' most original thinker in a generation, and the intellectual engine behind David Cameron and potentially even Boris Johnson and into Rishi Sunak. So it's a huge moment, Michael Gove moving. Andrea Leadsom, kind of less so. She played her part, as Sam Coates just said, in a sort of walk-on part of a brief leadership election. But Gove is the one that will really hurt the project.
And does his going today pass comment primarily on Rishi Sunak?
His letter is extremely supportive. I mean, Gove made an art form of the weaponising being polite, but actually on this occasion, I think he really does. He is a Conservative and he wants the Conservatives to succeed, and I don't think there's anything more than a kind of personal moment for him. He doesn't really fancy kind of 5 years of opposition, if that's what he thinks is coming, and I think that's what he does think is coming. There is a sort of time and tide, and he'll know that. So no, I don't think there was any malice in the timing. I think he made reference in his letter to politics taking a toll. His memoirs are the thing that I am most looking forward to in any kind of political biography. It's going to be a sensational read if he ever gets around to writing it.
Your giggle suggests that you know some things that we perhaps don't. But if he wanted to cause the least damage, wouldn't he wait until after the election?
No, because then you've got to cause a by-election and all that. I think you think that you're going to go in the rush, and his calculation. He's an absolute master of the dark arts of media manipulation. He'll know that this is news for a couple of hours and will be buried beneath lots of other news tomorrow and for the future. So he has done it by his lights in the least painful way to his party as he can.
You were suggesting that his biography might be a very entertaining reading. A very controversial figure, would you say?
Oh, controversial would suggest that he got into hot water, which he didn't on a kind of... There was never touched by any particular financial scandal or really any other kind of personal scandal. He talked himself into trouble on occasion. He had some strong and quite odd views about some things. I think some of his reflections on Islamism back in the early days were odd. The sort of Linton Crosby, the Conservatives' former kind of electoral kind of mastermind, thought he was toxic to voters. But he was, as I say, he was a deep thinker and an effective minister. He did push through some really genuinely consequential education reforms. He backed rehabilitation when that was very unfashionable in justice.
Francis Elliott. Francis Elliott, I'm so sorry, must leave it there only because of time, but thank you very much for sharing your views with us. Thank you. This is Sky News. Coming up, former Post Office Chief Executive Paula Venables is booed at the Horizon inquiry. I'll be speaking to a former sub-postmaster who spent 6 months in jail after being wrongly convicted.
It's really interesting because what they've been able to do is sort of stabilise living breast tissue in the lab for about a week. And what that means is that we can see directly the impact of new drugs and new therapies, how they would respond in the human body, as opposed to just in cells or in our closest animal relatives or anything like that. So this has the potential to really individualise and change treatment for women and men if they get breast cancer as it progresses. But this is very, very early stage. So more and more people are getting breast cancer. The mortality is dropping, so more and more people are living for longer with it or are surviving it. So what we need to do now after this piece of research is actually work out how we use the drugs on this tissue and see what happens next. Because when you look at human tissue as a whole, there are whole loads of things that go into it. The blood supply, the immune response, even just sort of the matrix that it lives in. And that's how we will begin to be able to tell the difference between why do some drugs work in some people and not in others? And when we can individualise care, that's when we will get the better responses. When you see these stories in the newspaper, you think, oh, how is this going to help me tomorrow? How is it going to help my loved one tomorrow? And unfortunately, we are quite a long way from that. But anything that gives us hope when we know that cancer incidence is rising is hugely important. We know that some cases of breast cancer will be related actually to alcohol. There's no safe amount of alcohol that you can have to reduce your risk of breast cancer. The more you drink, the increase your risk is. But what this research was showing, that over 10,000 people died of alcohol-specific related deaths in 2022, and that was the highest amount that has ever been recorded. And by that, I mean specifically liver related to alcohol, or perhaps another thing that was specifically related to that alcohol, as opposed to alcohol increasing your risk of cancer or alcohol increasing your risk of heart disease. And this is really important because we need to look at how do we prevent this alcohol-induced harm. In Wales and in Scotland, they have a minimum pricing per unit of alcohol, which may make a difference. But actually, what is the funding and treatment availabilities for people with drug and alcohol-related harm?
Welcome back. The former Post Office Chief Executive has been quizzed by lawyers representing former sub-postmasters on the final day of her evidence to the Horizon IT inquiry. She was accused of talking nonsense and being the architect of her own downfall. Well, it comes as hundreds of wrongfully convicted sub-postmasters will see their convictions quashed, with a new law rushed through Parliament on the last day it sits before the election. With me now is former sub-postmaster Vijay Parekh, who ran a post office in London and was wrongly convicted. Thank you very much for coming in today. We'll speak about the inquiry because you were there today and have been there. But first of all, tell us what happened to you in your own words.
Back in, bought the post office in 2006, and in 2009 they did an audit and there was a discrepancy of about £72,000. They suspended me, and in 2011 they convicted me for theft, and I was given 18 months prison, which was 6 months inside prison and then curfew leave and then staying at home.
Now, obviously, throughout you knew you were completely innocent. What was it like for you being incarcerated in prison for something you hadn't done?
Who can you tell someone? What can you tell them? No one listens because we're just a single person or keeping to our work, and there's no one to talk to because we can't find a big company like the post office individually. And who support us? No one.
Did you try to fight? Did you have any help whatsoever to make your case?
Well, no, because you can't find the paperwork because it's all held at the post office. So anything you want to find out, you can't because it is all in their archives, but not in our archives. So you can't trace it back to them or get any information from them at all.
As we said, you were wrongly convicted and spent 6 months in prison. That time that you spent in prison, did you believe that eventually you would be vindicated and you would get to the truth? And what was it like in prison for you?
Tried to keep to myself, you know, just do what the wardens would give you to do or work or etc. and keep to myself at the moment. Because I didn't want to tell everyone that I've been convicted for this. There would be surprised as well, and I didn't want people to know about it at that time. So, but it was more unpleasant, you know, trying to get to sleep, crying, worrying about your father, or my father, and the rest of the children, and nieces and nephews, and etc.
Where did you get your strength from?
My daughter. She was learning to be a barrister, and with her help and through her finding out about Justice of Sub-Postmasters, we started the legal battle that way.
Overall, what would you say the experience did to you as a human being?
It has spoiled at least 20 years of my life and the rest of families' lives. Because this was early retirement plan of running the post office, then get someone to manage it and work. Let them work and you just relax, but it never happened.
So let's move to the inquiry, which you were at today.
Yeah.
What did you think about what you heard there today?
Nothing new. Every single person who's come to the inquiry have been saying it's not my fault. I didn't know about it. It didn't come to me. I didn't read the statements, or I didn't see the emails. And then passing it down the line, or someone higher up, it's their fault, or it's passing it on just to the next level up.
Paula Venables today broke down in tears. What did you think when you witnessed that?
But those tears were quickly wiped away, and I started answering questions, didn't she? It didn't stay there for long, those tears. And it was, as far as I'm concerned, just for the show, that she's apologetic on what she's done.
Vijay Parekh, thank you very much for coming in to speak to us. And I can only extend my sympathy and apologies for what you've had to go through. Thank you very much for coming in. We're watching Sky News. Let's get the latest sport now with David.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
You're going to run, jump on the board and try and stick it in your glue like this.
How have you found retirement in general?
Retirement's been a real tough road. I think it is for everybody. I've had lots and lots of conversations with high-level athletes, and I think this is a period of discovering who Niall is, just existing. I've got a great life. I've got incredible people around me, and every day is a discovery just on my own self-awareness. For the most part, just putting my mental health at the forefront of my priority. I seem to be doing a lot better, certainly in the last sort of 6 months.
There's something switched. Why do you think you're doing better in the last 6 months?
I was just brave enough and disciplined enough to go, you know, I don't actually like the person that I am when my behaviour's acting up, or I'm in my own little pity party and upset about I still want to be doing sport. You know, I just thought I just took control of that and did the things I know that were good for my mental well-being. To be, and particularly a male athlete, we're deemed as alpha and strong and having the answers, and we're warriors. Feeling depressed, anxious, having problems with addiction, they were really, really scary times in my life, and I certainly didn't feel the latter of all those feelings. And I think it's quite powerful for a male athlete to come out and talk about this. And in talking, I felt in the deepest, darkest moments, all I needed was someone to speak my.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up in the next hour, more reaction as high-profile Conservative MPs Andrea Leadsom and Michael Gove announced that they are stepping down.
day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first.
This is Sky News at 9 o'clock. The headlines this evening. Andrea Leadsom and Michael Gove add to the growing exodus of Conservative MPs as they announce they won't be seeking re-election. It comes as the party leaders take their election messages to the country on day 2 of the campaign trail. Also ahead, Paula Venables is accused of being in La La Land as the former post office boss tearfully concludes her evidence to the inquiry.
I loved the post office. I gave it...
And the International Court of Justice orders Israel to halt its offensive in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Good evening. We start with breaking news, and the former Cabinet Minister, Andrea Leadsom, has become the latest Conservative MP to announce they won't be seeking re-election. Her announcement within the last few minutes came less than 2 hours after the Housing Secretary Michael Gove announced that he's standing down. Well, it means 78 Conservative MPs will not contest their seats in July. Michael Gove released a statement saying, "No one in politics is a conscript. We are volunteers who willingly choose our fate. And the chance to serve is wonderful. But there comes a moment when you know that it is time to leave, that a new generation should lead." Let's turn to the campaign trail, and Sir Keir Starmer's been to Glasgow, where he launched his party's campaign north of the border, along with the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar. Sir Keir told Sky News that winning votes in Scotland wasn't just about winning the election, but also about positioning himself as a Prime Minister for the whole of the UK. Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby, has this report.
Friends, please welcome my friend, Keir Starmer.
Starmer's battleground tour starts in Scotland. His message singular, change. His target, the SNP.
This is an election about change. And Scotland's voice is vital, absolutely vital. It needs to be a leading voice. Send a message. Send a message. That is the height of the SNP ambition, to send a message. A protest in Westminster. I don't want Scotland to send a message. I want Scotland to send a government, a Labour government.
And the mood here buoyant, the energy palpable. In 4 elections on the bounce, Labour has been nearly wiped out in Scotland by the SNP. This pair now on the cusp of a very big comeback, with dozens of seats in play that Starmer says he has to convert.
Scotland is absolutely vital to Labour government, not just numerically, although that's important, but also because if I'm privileged enough to come in to serve as the Prime Minister, I want to be the Prime Minister for the whole of the United Kingdom, and therefore powerful voices from Scotland matter.
You say that you need Scotland to win a Labour government, but that is not true. Is this a version of Project Fear? You are frightening Scots in saying if you don't vote Labour, you're going to get the Tories, when they can still vote if they want for the SNP.
No, it's a recognition of the low base we started from in 2019, the project that we're building, which I want to be a project for all of Britain to take us forward, but also something which is really important to me personally.
Labour's Scottish leader Anna Sarwar's task then to take the SNP out.
If you want to get rid of the Tories, if you want to maximise Scotland's influence, if you want to deliver the change Scotland and the UK needs, you need to vote Scottish Labour.
From one battleground to another, stop to South Ribble, a classic marginal seat in the northwest, turned to Blair in '97, the Tories taking it back in 2010.
In a way, this is where the power goes away from myself and Rishi Sunak and to you, because you're the ones who are going to be going into the polling booth.
But in this election, away from the geography, other fault lines emerging. Swathes of traditional Labour voters in seats that aren't marginal, concerned about this leader's stance on the Israel-Hamas war. You also have an issue with another battleground emerging for you in terms of the election, which is the matter of the Israel-Hamas war. You keep saying you have a plan to resolve these tensions. What's the plan?
We are very clear that, and have been now for weeks and weeks and weeks, there needs to be a ceasefire straight away. We have to stop the hostilities because, you know, thousands upon thousands of people have been killed in Gaza. Desperately need humanitarian aid to come in and the beginning of a process to a two-state solution, including recognition of Palestine.
Now into the heavy lifting of this campaign, Starmer crisscrossing the country. But his majority doesn't just rest on marginals. He has to secure his base too. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Lancashire.
Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is in central lobby of the Houses of Parliament for us. And, John, I think since we last spoke, we've had another Conservative MP deciding not to stand after the general election.
And not just any MP, but another former cabinet minister. That must be up to about 17 or 18 now. Andrea Leadsom had a number of cabinet posts. She recently returned to government in a much more junior role, but in an area that she takes a great interest in, looking after child illnesses and infant health and all that sort of stuff as a junior minister at Health, a job she seemed to be enjoying. Now, she has written a letter to the Prime Minister, which I have to say is not what you might call glowing in praise for Rishi Sunak, because right at the end of it, she talks about her job as what she calls Minister for Life, Primary Care and Public Health, and so on. Then she says, I will continue to support the Conservative Party through this general election and in the future as the party best aligned with the ideals and values of the people of the UK. Note she does not say, as a lot of MPs and ministers do when they quit, you have my full support, I will support you personally. Now, we have revealed this week that at a meeting of the 1922 committee, on the day the Prime Minister called the general election, upstairs in a committee room, around about the same time the Prime Minister was getting soaked in Downing Street, she asked Sir Graham Brady, can a minister put in a letter of no confidence? So clearly she has lost confidence in Rishi Sunak. She was considering, let's say, perhaps joining the mutineers who were wanting to get rid of Rishi Sunak even at this late stage. So this is clearly a blow to Rishi Sunak. She entered the House in 2010, served as a minister under, from memory, Mr. Cameron, most of the prime ministers we've had in that period, in a number of posts. One thinks of environment, business and so on, energy and so on. And she was leader of the House of Commons, bringing in various reforms there as well, regarded as a pretty successful leader of the House of Commons. She's going. The numbers are up to the high 70s now. A little earlier on, we heard that Michael Gove was going. That was as the debate in the chamber on what was called a valedictory debate, and all those, or as many as wanted to, MPs who wanted to say their goodbyes in the chamber. They included Theresa May, Harriet Harman on the Labour side, Ben Wallace on the Conservative side. And it all got quite emotional at times. And Matt Hancock, right at the end of the debate, alerted MPs to the fact that Mr. Gove was going. Now, Mr. Gove has talked about in his letter of resignation to the Prime Minister on the toll that office takes on MPs and their families, ministers and their families. He, of course, is an ex-journalist. He's had 5 cabinet posts. He was, as he points out in his letter, led the Vote Leave campaign. The man who brought Dominic Cummings into government controversially. Look where that led to. He perhaps will will go back to journalism. Andrea Leadsom may go back to a business career. I think from memory she worked in banking before she was a member of Parliament. So we are seeing a real brain drain. I mean, Parliament has prorogued now. It's all over. Lindsay Hoyle led MPs up to the Lords for the last rites, if you like, of this Parliament. And MPs will leave here, or have left here tonight, until after the election on July the 4th. But what is really significant today is the number of MPs, Conservative MPs and senior Conservative MPs who are, let's say, throwing in the towel. Does it suggest that they've no faith in the Tories at this general election? Well, you could argue that it looks like that. And it is record numbers. More Tory MPs quitting than quit in 1997. And we all know what happened in that election. Labour won a landslide. Now, the arithmetic of this general election suggests that the Labour Party's got a lot more to do, bigger swing, more seats to win back than Mr Blair in 1997. But clearly, a lot of Conservative MPs are suggesting that they don't have faith in Mr Sunak. They don't have faith that the Conservatives can win the general election. There's 16, 17, 18 serving or former cabinet ministers going, and getting on towards 80 Tory MPs going, which is more than in 1997. So it has turned out to be quite a dramatic day here at Westminster. We've had that debate with emotional speeches and some tears, some laughs, but the really dominant thing that we'll all remember about tonight is the fact that right at the end of this Parliament, two major figures, Michael Gove and Andrea Leadsom, have stunned MPs, particularly Conservative MPs, by announcing that they are joining that very, very big exodus from this place.
OK, John, thank you very much for that.